The Road to Autonomy is presented by the Road to Autonomy Index. The Road to Autonomy Index is a rules-based equity benchmark index that measures the performance of a basket of global companies that are involved in the development and commercialization of autonomy. Institutional investors and fund managers are watching megatrends that are shaping investment opportunities today. These megatrends are creating thematic investment ideas and opportunities for forward-thinking investors. We believe that one of the biggest megatrends today is autonomy. That's why we created the Road to Autonomy Index, the world's first and only pure-play index to track the thematic investment opportunity in autonomy. Follow the Road to Autonomy Index on your favorite finance app by simply typing in the ticker Autonomy. To learn more about the Road to Autonomy Index, visit roadtoautonomy.com/index. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to welcome back Alan Ohnsman, Senior Editor Forbes. Alan, welcome back, sir.
Hi, Grayson. Good to be with you.
It's always great to have you here. There's a common denominator every time you come on. The conversations are interesting and they're fun.
That's the goal.
So today's going to be no different. There's a lot of things changing in energy, autonomy, and policy. And all signs are pointing to California appears to be open for business again. They seem to be welcoming autonomy. You have Ms. Dee Dee Myers, who's a senior advisor to the governor and director of the governor's office of business. She forcibly came out in a very strongly worded letter opposing AB 316. Where did this come from? It seems that the Newsom administration has, I don't want to go this far, but have welcome arms to autonomy lately when you back that in with the CUPC ruling.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you can't overlook the fact that labor is very influential in the state of California, and the Teamsters obviously have some concerns about autonomous trucking in the state. So that there is going to be a fight in the legislature over this between pro-labor members of the assembly versus what the governor and his team want to do. But, that right now, that's a very difficult situation because the state wants to support the tech and get it out there and sees the benefits of that. But at the same time, you have active opposition from a very powerful labor group that represents a lot of truckers in the state of California.
How much does this come down to messaging? I've read some pro-labor tweets and some press releases. The language is very harsh, very bombastic. It's not really resonating. Why can't we just get to the point where we can become adults and sit around the table and have an honest conversation? Here are your concerns, here are our concerns, and come together? Because you and I both know autonomy is going to create jobs. You need wonderful men and women to train the trucks. You need them to unload the trucks, to manage the depots, to build the fueling infrastructure. Why can't a deal be had where perhaps the facilities are unionized or some sort of compromise where we can have an honest conversation, hear everybody's concerns out?
Well, yeah, that's a good observation. I think whether it's autonomy or AI or any form of new technology, the fear of permanent job loss is great. And in the case of trucking, we know that there is a shortage of truck drivers, especially long haul. At the same time, a technology that could mitigate that, the concern is, well, it not only solves the human labor shortage, it does away with the human altogether at some point. So I think that's the real concern. You are correct, though. There's going to be a need to kind of rethink logistics and trucking, that maybe over time the trucks do become autonomous, but you will need humans in the loop for a whole range of things, especially like loading and unloading, receiving and tracking, and even maybe offering remote support. So it's going to undergo an evolution. But I think right now there is just a really, really powerful opposition, spearheaded by the Teamsters in this case, to just say, no, we don't want this coming in at all. And I think what they've said is you can have it, but there needs to be a human driver on board at all times.
That's what they want. Obviously, the Newsom administration is signaling that they're not going to get it. It's positive for the economy of California, and it's positive for the companies. When you look at autonomous trucking, in the early days, there was too simple before, let's call them, I'll use the nice term, the very public missteps around the management of the company. They were going the whole way from facility to facility, or if you want to use a technical term, dock to dock. The companies that are left and operating, they're focused on hub to hub, where the last mile delivery will be done by a human driver. We had the Teamster negotiations with UPS, and factoring in benefits, the average pay for a 5-year driver is $170,000 for a UPS driver. Perhaps there's a compromise there when the vehicles leave the depot and go in the local routes and neighborhoods. Perhaps those are human driven, and you get some sort of ramification around $170,000, let's say $120,000. Those are high paying jobs, and think about the quality of life. Then they can go home to their families at night. Perhaps that's a potential compromise at the end of the day.
I guess so, but I think ultimately their basic view is this is going to eliminate human jobs. And until there is a better understanding of the full ramifications of the use of the technology, can it be complementary or is it a replacement? And I don't know that we're there yet. I think there are optimistic views of how it might work. But the reality is, if a company has access to a technology that over time will save it meaningfully in terms of its fixed cost of operations, it'll take advantage of it. And in many cases, that could mean the replacement of the human labor. And that is the concern at the heart of this. So I'm not sure how we move past that. And it's not, and again, it's not just an autonomous vehicle technology. It's across all of these new uses of AI that we don't fully understand yet, like how far it's going to go.
You're seeing it. Well, you're based in Southern California, my old home base, and you have the writers' strike, the actors' strike. They're out on strike, and I still read the Hollywood Reporter. They do some really great reporting around Hollywood. And I noticed a comment from Fran Drescher. Most of the listeners will know Fran Drescher from the sitcom that she wrote and produced, The Nanny. She's now leading the negotiations for SAG-AFTRA as their president. And Ms. Drescher, she talked about self-driving vehicles in Santa Monica. And she's bringing that into the labor negotiations with the studios and saying, look at what these cars are doing. The same thing's going to do this to AI. There's a lot of different technologies. I use Google Bard. I think it's really great for copy editing and doing tasks. You have a lot of individuals very publicly that use ChatGPT for tasks. To me, with the labor on the SAG-AFTRA side, isn't there a middle ground compromise? Some of the smartest, brightest men and women write great movies. In my personal opinion, AI could not write Citizen Kane. It took the mad genius of Orson Welles to write Citizen Kane. You have Peter O'Toole as an actor in Lawrence of Arabia. AI bots is not going to design that. Mr. O'Toole has a gift. Actors have gifts. Writers have gifts. But AI can help them do their job. So is there potential middle ground there as well?
That's a big question. Yeah, I it's hard to say. I don't, as you say, like, could AI write Citizen Kane? No. But could AI write a lot of the box office comic book movie stuff? Yeah, it could do it because it's incredibly formulaic. So anything where there's a formula, AI is going to be really good at. We're moving into a new world, and again, the ramifications of AI from trucking to movie making to script writing. I think it is reasonable to be concerned and to think about how can we use these as complementary tools. And again, not removing the human from the thing. If it's music, if it's art, if it's any sort of creative endeavor, do you really want, do you think like an AI system is going to be interesting and captivate you the way that, say, a very gifted human artist could? Most likely not, but 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now, who knows, as the technology evolves. But trucking is a great starting point for this, and robotaxi, to see that even in its infancy, the tension is there, and the fears of replacement of jobs and the elimination of entire categories of work are concerning to a lot of people. And I think that's very understandable, given that whether it's a studio or a trucking company, if they see a huge upside for using it in terms of reducing costs and improving efficiency, they're going to go for it.
It comes down to efficiency, but if you look at, they said, the cell phone's going to kill jobs. Cell phone created jobs, and Apple invented the App Store, and that's a whole economy into itself. The technology is going to create jobs. We just don't yet know where those jobs are going to be created, how they're going to be created. And I'll put on my DC policy wonk hat. If we abandon the technology, then you raise potential national security issues. That because we have to have a really good understanding of this technology, of how it's going to be used and how it's going to be deployed. Because the AI technology is not going to be deployed in transportation. It's going to be used in harmful ways. It's going to be used for hacking. It's going to be used in war. But we really have to have a true understanding of how that technology works, and we have to embrace it. How we embrace it, that's up for debate, but we have to. And so when you look at the progress that we're making as a society, look at the progress that we're doing on renewable energy, and you do a really great job covering renewable energy and the climate crisis that's currently happening there. We're starting to see a shift on the autonomy side. In the early days, in some of your early reporting, let's go back 5 years, 6 years, in some of the covers that you did, it was the rah, rah, rah,
Yeah.
let's go raise $100 million round. This company raised a $600 million round. Let's call it the cheerleader days. And it was just focused on building a product. Today, there's a company called Gatik that's emerging. They're not at the rah, rah, rah stage, but what they have different from those companies, when you talk to Gahan, their CEO, they have a huge focus on generating revenue and operating in use cases that are controlled and generating revenue. What are your thoughts on Gatik and their approach to autonomy? Because it seems like they're the little engine that could at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. And to your point, if you wind the clock back 5 years ago, the remarkable amounts of money flowing into autonomy, billions of dollars going in, big bets by some of the largest tech companies in the world. And it seemed that that was really going to be enough to move the needle, that we're only a few years away from this being widespread and available. And it turns out that this is truly one of the most complex scientific endeavors ever, like trying to do this. And I would say it's akin to the effort to send humans to Mars, where on paper that might seem like a doable thing. But when you begin to understand how much time it will take, the resources to keep people alive, how they can exist under the very intense radiation of the Martian surface. And you realize how expensive an endeavor that might be, how much technology it will require. You think, you know what? Maybe we should go to the moon first. And I think that's really where Gatik is. Gatik is a company that did not raise billions of dollars. And Gatik did not come out of the gate saying, we're going to use autonomy for everything. We're going to do robotaxi. We're going to do trucking. We're going to do food deliveries. You name it, we're going to do it. They focused on one thing: middle mile delivery from a distribution center to a large retail store. That's it. Nothing else. They've raised to date, after 5 or 6 years as a company, they've raised about $120 million, give or take. At least that's what they've publicly disclosed. They may have raised some more that they're not talking about at this time. But that is that's a pittance compared to, say, a Waymo, which in its last public round did multiple billions from big investors, or Cruise, which has raised billions and billions of dollars from a whole range of companies. Gatik was easy to ignore for a long time because you saw, Waymo rolls out robotaxi service in Phoenix a few years ago. And Cruise has been running robotaxi pilot and now paid service in San Francisco the last couple of years. Those look more interesting. You see, you mentioned earlier, robotic trucking, whether it was Too Simple or Aurora or Waymo, Kodiak, all these companies, raft of companies running pilots with autonomous trucking. No one paid that much attention to what Gatik was doing because it was boring. It's not that interesting to see an autonomous truck go from a warehouse to a store on a fixed route multiple times a day at relatively low speed. Nothing interesting about that, except it makes money. And right now, Gatik signs contracts with companies. Each vehicle they put into service is guaranteed revenue of $200,000 a year per vehicle. They currently have more than 50 autonomous vehicles in operation. So you do the math. This year, they may be approaching something close to $10 million in revenue for a very small company, a company that's only raised publicly about $115 to $120 million. In the years to come, and perhaps as soon as the end of next year, their fleet size will be considerably larger. They're working with Walmart, they're working with Kroger, they're working with Loblaw, which has stores up in Canada. They have other retail customers, some very famous ones that they're not publicly talking about yet. They do a whole range of product. They work with Pitney Bowes, doing consumer products for Pitney Bowes. And the interesting thing is, they're already generating a fairly respectable amount of revenue at an early stage. And I would say it's hard, there's no data on this to compare, but I would say objectively, they may already be generating more revenue than either Waymo or Cruise, or maybe the two of them combined from their public robotaxi services right now. So this is an interesting thing. And you think, well, okay, fine. They're doing this one simple thing, middle mile. They're not picking up passengers. They're not doing food deliveries, individual meal delivery, let's say, like Neuro wants to do or something like that. They're doing deliveries of groceries for the most part, or consumer goods to a big box retail store. And they're doing it multiple times a day. The reason why that becomes very interesting is what they're doing is simple. They're going after the low-hanging fruit. They're not trying to do the hard thing first. Recently, in a at the AV conference in San Francisco in July, I chatted with Aisha Evans from Zoox, and Zoox remains committed to commercializing robotaxi. And Zoox and Cruise and others, when you ask, well, why are you doing that right now? And the answer is because we want to do the hard thing. We want to accomplish the hard thing first. And I guess I understand that from one end, because the idea is if you can, for example, master robotaxis in San Francisco, everything will be easy from there. So the idea is you can scale faster if you do the hard thing first. That's, that's one school of thought. The way I kind of think about it is, well, maybe you don't do the hardest thing first. Maybe you do the thing you can do now first, and then branch from there. When we're born, we don't come out of the womb running, We lay there, and then we crawl, and then we stand, and then we walk, and then we run. That really feels like where Gatik is going, because Gatik learned a lot by doing the simple thing. When they started out in Bentonville, Arkansas, doing deliveries for Walmart, they would do these crazy slow routes to avoid traffic, to avoid hard things, to avoid left turns. They would avoid left turns and always do like a series of rights until they get to where they were going, because the time was not quite so critical. If it took them an extra 10 or 15 minutes to do a delivery, that was fine. No one was complaining. The stores knew when goods were arriving. And so if they took a more circuitous route or a slower route that was optimized for maximum safety and the fewest headaches, fine, no problem. Over time, they can now do left turns and they don't have to be quite as cautious as they were, because they got better by doing it over and over and over again. And they've shifted, most of their current operations are in Dallas for a whole range of retail customers in Dallas. They still primarily are doing surface streets, city streets. They do try to avoid going by fire stations. They try to avoid going by police stations. They design their routes to avoid headaches. As we see in San Francisco, Cruise and Waymo seem to find nothing but headaches in trying to operate in that environment. But their argument is, we're going to master this. It's going to be rough at first, but we'll get it, and then we'll be good. And Gatik's approach is, let's stay away from that and then introduce it gradually. We'll ease into it. And the interesting thing is, it turns out that that's working. And they've already built a very interesting, they're not profitable. They'll be right up front. They're not profitable, but they're generating a decent amount of revenue for a relatively small company. They think if all goes well, though, they could be profitable within as little as 2 to 3 years, by 2025, 2026. I've never heard a firm target for profitability from the bigger players in the space. I know Mary Barra's very upbeat on Cruise and the kind of revenue that Cruise could be generating by about the same time, 2025, 2026. We shall see. But Gatik's business model seems a lot cleaner. And here's the thing. As they get better at the middle mile, they get a little more comfortable doing other things. So right now they do up to like class 6, class 7 trucks. They don't do a lot of highway driving, but they will be doing highway driving over time. Because again, just like that infant that learned how to crawl and then walk and then run, they're doing one thing at a time. So they started simple, but their goal is to, over time, they will move into highway trucking. They will move into class 8 trucking. They will move into other types of delivery services that they're not doing now. And it's going to be this gradual evolution of the business. And all of it is premised on the fact that it has to be a revenue generator. They're not just running pilots to run pilots. Aurora is hoping to open its first commercial trucking route in Texas, I think next year, by the end of next year. They want to be commercial. It will primarily be a single route. Is that going to be profitable? They'll generate revenue from it, but it may be far less than what Gatik is getting today doing these simpler applications. By the time Gatik is ready to do highway trucking, it's probably going to have a very interesting model and a long track record of success building, building, building. So you do one thing after the other, accomplish one thing, move to the next. And that's why I think it is becoming the most interesting play in the AV space, as far as I'm concerned, because there's been zero hype around this company, none. Their vehicles, when you see their first generation and even their second generation trucks, they don't look futuristic. They look like Ford trucks with, that have been outfitted with LiDAR and cameras and other things, and there's nothing sexy about it. But their new truck that's coming, that they've developed with Isuzu, is very interesting. It's still a diesel powertrain, so they haven't shifted to full electric yet. But the integration of the LiDAR and the cameras, the packaging is much nicer. It's a very contemporary looking medium duty truck up to a class 6, I think they're doing. And over time, they're going to shift to an electric powertrain. They may do some work with BYD and use some BYD electric trucks as well. So they're doing things in a really methodical, smart way where they're not shouting to the world, hey, look at us. We're going to do the most incredibly difficult thing with this technology and rock your world. It's the frog in the pot of water. They're turning up the heat slowly. So I really am fascinated by that approach because it is radically different than what others have done. You have other players were waiting to see how they evolve. Wabi up in Canada, for example, Raquel Erdison's company is a very interesting one. Her belief is that you can do the most aggressive simulation testing for the trucks, and you can develop this incredible ability before you even launch your first real world trucks. Maybe, it could be, but it may be some time before we know whether that worked or not. So I think there are multiple paths to succeed in autonomy, and I think all of us assumed with the money, with the technical resources, and with the brilliance of the people working for lots of these companies like Waymo and Cruise and Aurora and Motional and Zoox and others, surely they would be the first to achieve this. And you look at a little company that seemed like an also ran, Gatik, and it's like, oh, that's cute, middle mile, great, deliver your groceries, okay. But it turns out that that might have been the smartest thing all along. And again, you think about India landing their probe on the South Pole of the moon. They did it on a shoestring. And more storied space programs, Russia, Japan, others have not been able to achieve that landing in the same place. They did it on a shoestring. There seem to be parallels with Gatik, like where they're going, because they're using resources well. They're generating respectable revenue for a company of their size. And that revenue may get a lot bigger a lot sooner. In fact, I believe they've locked in contracts over the next 3 to 5 years, ensuring at least like $100 million of revenue with some major retail customers. So if over time, will they go public? Most likely, yes. But Gautam, the CEO, his plan is not to IPO until they're profitable. What an interesting novel approach. Rather than someday this company will generate revenue and someday this company will be incredibly profitable. We don't know when, but buy our stock today versus here's our revenue from the last 5 years or 3 years or whatever the time frame is. And we are profitable on a GAAP basis. And we hope you like our IPO. Please invest.
There's a lot of things to unpack there. I met years and years ago. Riley Brennan from Trucks VC connected us before. I think Gatik might have been a month and a half old, and we met in a coffee shop in Palo Alto, and we're talking about the business, and I'm starting to poke holes and ask questions, and he goes, "Everything we do will generate revenue. It is my job to run a business, not to engineer a product, to run a business." In that moment, when that coffee shop resonated with me, and I saw Gaham a few weeks back at the JP Morgan Auto Conference in New York City, where he presented to institutional investors, pension funds, hedge funds, and his presentation compared to other presentations, James Reed from Kodiak did a phenomenal job as well, was Gaham's whole thing is that we run a business, we're going to run a profitable business. We're going to use autonomy in a profitable manner. And the reception that I saw from that room from investors was very clear to what you're saying. No IPO until we're profitable.
Yeah.
That's in the old days, that was common sense. And then all of a sudden we had this SPAC nonsense and all this other stuff. Any thoughts from your perspective of where his discipline and laser focus comes from of running a business? And I'll use the term in the traditional manner around profits and growing revenue.
It's hard to say that exactly. The thing that I'm impressed by Gautam is some years ago when they created the company Gatik, what he saw was this unmet need in the middle mile space, which is very specific. Middle mile grew up because of the sudden Amazon basically created it with getting groceries delivered to you. Getting groceries delivered to your home or the ability. So online grocery shopping kind of created the middle mile. And Gatik is not bringing the groceries to your home. They're handling deliveries from the distribution center to the store, where then the groceries are for your order are separated out. But what he noticed was, or seemed to be aware of, was that the companies did not have a good solution for this in the short term because, again, we talked about earlier, a shortage of truck drivers. There are not enough human drivers to do all of these deliveries as quickly as they would like. So being able to offer online grocery shopping, which has gotten much bigger over the past few years, he saw an unmet need. And this is the real difference. So robotaxi replaces the human driver. We have taxis, we have Ubers, we have Lyfts. Robotaxi does the exact same thing. It replicates something that already exists, and with the goal of removing the human driver. Autonomous trucking, same thing. And the argument is, well, we don't have enough human drivers, so we are supplementing the shortage. But fundamentally, it is replacing something that for which you already have a human in the loop. You may not have enough humans, but you have a human in the loop. Middle mile was literally a brand new opportunity where it was a real problem, where the driver shortage and availability was far more severe than in long haul trucking, for example, where it literally was the difference between we can offer this service or we cannot offer the service. And so he saw that as a real opportunity that no one else kind of paid attention to. And I think that gets to the business sense here, because isn't that really the goal of every successful business or great business in history is why don't you fulfill an unmet need or a profoundly underserved need, especially if it's a new one? The ability to identify that and then jump on it. I think that's fundamentally that's sort of a classic approach to running a successful business. And he and his co-founders had the wherewithal to sort of catch this at a very early stage. Now, he is a brilliant guy. I mean, he's a computer scientist from Carnegie Mellon University. So he's a serious dude when it comes to the tech side of things. But he does have a pretty sharp, no nonsense understanding of what makes for a good business. And I think there's a nice kind of throwback quality to that of you do the right things. You can't do everything. Practicality. Let's do the thing we can do, and let's do the thing that no one else is paying attention to, because everyone is moving to these sexier things. It's easier to talk about robotaxis or robot trucking, long haul trucking, than to say, yeah, we're just hauling groceries back and forth from a distribution center to a store and back. It's a bus service basically for food and consumer goods. There's nothing sexy about it, but it's a good business. It's a real business. and it's going to be growing. And it helps these big retailers provide convenience to their customers because they're getting, you want your asparagus and your particular type of yogurt or whatever, and your almond milk, you can now get it within this window because those shipments are coming to the store with regularity. So I think he's just taken and the whole company, that they've taken a really smart, no nonsense approach that's kind of refreshing at this point because there's zero pie in the sky. Nothing is, it's the antithesis of this magical future. It's like, no, they need this. Companies need assistance with this. Retailers need assistance with this. This is a service we can actually provide today. There's a gradualist approach that actually makes a lot of sense because, as we've seen in San Francisco, since the CPUC allowed Cruise and Waymo to expand their fleets, it's been really negative blowback there locally. It's like freaking people out. There has just been, it has not gone smoothly. And so it exposes all the warts. And it does seem that this stealthier approach that Gatik has taken, they've brought the vehicles in modest numbers, scaled up over time. There are no reports that I'm aware of terrible road accidents or great inconveniences. I haven't heard back a full report from the Dallas Police Department yet. But the fact that they can't point to one, and I haven't read one yet, it doesn't mean they haven't happened, but it doesn't seem like it's been a big deal. But the same is true of Waymo in Phoenix. I mean, if you compare Phoenix to San Francisco, Waymo is taking nothing away from any of these companies. Waymo has achieved remarkable things with its technology. They're phenomenal. I mean, if you can get one, they're very popular in Phoenix. The service works there, but when you think about how much has gone in to make that happen in terms of resources and financial resources, what is the payback period for it? And when will that really truly be profitable? Couldn't begin to estimate.
Waymo has a long way to go. You have TCI Fund Management. They're in there as an activist investor. They published that open letter about trying to cut back on spending. You have Ruth Port, and I've called the de facto CEO of Waymo come September 1st when she's going to oversee all the spending for other bets. And then you got $130 billion in cash. You're getting 5% from the Fed on that in a money market. And then you got the advertising business that I don't think is going to slow down the way Wall Street. Alphabet keeps spitting off cash, but at some point, investors are going to demand profitability. And then if we do go into a recessionary environment, the Fed continues to raise and we see strain in consumers, do consumers opt not to ride in the Waymo vehicles, not for a bicycle or to walk to save money? I'd love to get your opinion on that. But then on the other side of that equation, you're starting to see some really interesting data. Wall Street Journal's published this. The Financial Times has published a lot of this around tip shaming. And you're starting to see data now where consumer behavior is changing. Instead of having stuff delivered and getting tip shamed and paying the fee, they're driving to pick it up. It could be groceries. It could be takeout food. You're seeing Walmarts are redesigning their parking lots for Walmart grocery pickup. On one side of the equation, I'm concerned about it from a robotaxi economic standpoint. But on the other side, it seems like if we go into a recessionary environment, consumers opt to pick up their groceries. This fits right into Gatik's model. Everybody else is panicked in the economic environment. It seems like the economic environment for Gatik could act as a catalyst.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting point. I mean, but again, that for Gatik's service, that doesn't really change anything, right? Because they're not doing the delivery to your home, right? So there's no tipping involved there. They're still just the middleman in this case. So they're completely, people still want what they want, like right away. So whether I'm waiting for it to come to my home by delivery or if I go to get it, I want to know that exactly the items that I want are there and ready for pickup. And so, yeah, Gatik is insulated from that. It doesn't affect their business model. I mean, maybe someday they will move into the business that Nuro wants to do with delivering food and groceries to you. But as has been pointed out, that's as complicated as robotaxi because the amount of data it requires to offer a robotaxi service. I mean, after 5 years of operating in Phoenix, Waymo covers a lot of the city, but it still doesn't cover 100% of the city because every square mile you add, it's like exponential increase in the amount of data that you need versus doing like fixed route deliveries point to point and not, and that could be, I think Gatik is handling multiple deliveries now with a single vehicle. So they might do 7 or 8 stops, but those are the same. They don't change. Like it's the same stores. So you go from, you pick up your stuff and then you drop off at these different stores. That's very different than if you hail a robotaxi on the corner somewhere downtown in Phoenix or San Francisco and you want to go to some particular address. The complexity of that is enormous. Like how much data and testing was required in the back end to allow for that versus expanding your route coverage in Dallas to two or three additional Walmart stores, right? There's no comparison. And so it's that difference in the back end of what it takes to be able to do these things. So individualized grocery deliveries or taking people to wherever they need to go in an urban environment or suburban environment on a robotaxi is so much harder than what Gatik is doing. And to my mind, it's like, yeah, so why don't you do the thing you can actually do and show that the technology works? So, I mean, weirdly, after there's been negative press back and forth on AVs, especially at San Francisco, Gatik is a more positive story where it's showing this can work and you can use it. It can't do everything, but here's what it can do.
On the Waymo front, the robotaxi business is scaling, and all signs and public filings point to Waymo continuing to invest and scale the robotaxi business. They're currently mapping in LA, looking for an expansion there. They're probably going to come to the Southeast at some point. We had the announcement a few weeks back that Waymo shut down Waymo Via.
Yeah.
Any insight why? And part of that, what wasn't covered a lot, you did an article on it years ago. Mm-hmm. They had a partnership with UPS for package delivery early on, and using the Pacifica minivans. Mm-hmm. I believe they were blue for the delivery effort. They designed them a little bit differently. Was the shutdown of Via, was that just a purely focus on robotaxi, or was that what it was?
Yeah, I mean, I think really that's what it's come down to. It's like under John Kravchik, they had multiple targets. They wanted to do logistics and delivery. They wanted to do robotaxi. They also were talking about partnering with auto manufacturers to provide tech they would license technology to different companies to use in their vehicles. So individual vehicle autonomy. And over time, I mean, I think aspirationally they still plan to do all of those things, but it does seem that there has been pressure to focus. And it's interesting that they opted for robotaxi over trucking, because I think the belief has been for so long that the trucking was hard but easier than robotaxi. And I think now the feeling is both are hard in different ways. In robotaxi, it's the profound complexity of mastering urban environments and all of the things that come with that. And with trucking, it really comes down to the physics of operating an 80,000 pound vehicle at highway speeds in high winds, in flooding conditions, rain, sleet, black ice, the potential for really horrible accidents if things go wrong. So while operationally the domain is somewhat simpler on a highway, you don't have pedestrians and bicycles and things like that to deal with, but it has a lot of challenges, and speed and weight and wind and things are not your friend when you're talking about a vehicle of that size. So in Waymo's case, they have a certain amount of funds. It may be that they need to prioritize the funds they have because perhaps Alphabet is not going to be, there is a bottom. They're not going to just fund limitlessly forever and ever and ever. You do need to begin showing some real results. And I guess they have decided that they've made a lot of progress in robotaxi. That was their starting point. That's where they've been the strongest. They remain the benchmark for the industry. And so the feeling is, okay, let's keep doing this. I think the challenge for Waymo, as for all the companies, is scalability, because even Phoenix, which is a pretty easy place by comparison versus San Francisco, is hard. And driving is hard. What we do as human drivers is not, we take a lot of it for granted, but the things that we're seeing and processing, and then our experience with the world and our ability to guess what's going to happen, turns out to be pretty good compared to an AI system. So this is tough stuff. I mean, I would argue that I think San Francisco was just a mistake. I think it was the wrong city to focus on. I think it would have made much more sense to go to Phoenix, go to Orlando, even Los Angeles, because LA is different. It has pockets of density. LA is an interesting mix of both urban, suburban. But the reason I always argue that LA is easier is You've driven in Los Angeles. How does the traffic move in LA? Slow.
Slow and
That's
slower.
right.
There's two
That's
speeds,
right.
slow and
And I
slower.
cannot imagine a simpler environment for a robotaxi on the 10 at rush hour where you are creeping along at 1 to 2 miles an hour. So, I mean, that's why I've always argued LA is simpler. I also think, and this is where Gatik, to me, again, getting back to Gatik, what they're doing appeals to me because for years, my feeling has been like, you know what? If someone really wants to get autonomy out there, you should work with a transit agency and put it on the buses. You know why? Because they never go more than 35 miles an hour and they operate on fixed routes. And you keep the driver there. The human driver doesn't leave, but they end up being more of sort of a concierge, on the bus. So they can work with the passengers, keep
Mm-hmm.
an eye on things, for safety, that's good. For visitors, you can tell them where to get off and where you transit to the subway or whatever. But it's a simpler domain. Don't overburden the system. The reason companies don't do that with transit is there's no money in it because transit agencies have no money. But if you wanted to prove the concept and get it out there, I can't think of a better, easier way to do that. And you don't even need full level 4 autonomy to do it. Something that used to be called level 3, where the driver doesn't have to watch every second. The system can handle that hands-free driving over low speed, over fixed route. There is a lot to be said for that. And Gatik would say, well, yeah, but what we do is even easier because we don't have to worry about protecting humans inside the vehicle. And we have fewer stops. And, I mean, a bus is going to go, I don't know, a couple hundred miles per day on many, many stops over time. The Gatik vehicle might do 100 miles per day, but it's only going to do like the same 8 or 9 stops all day long, over and over and over again. So that repeatability and predictability of the route is the key thing. And that's where with robotaxi, when you begin to think about the number of points you need to know to operate that, to be able to take someone anywhere, it is it's a lot. It's a dramatic amount of data. It's a dramatic amount of processing power to do that mapping and all of the support that has to go in before you can offer that service is remarkable. So again, this goes back to maybe it's better to do the easy thing first. Maybe it's better to go for that, pick the low hanging fruit before you try to get to the top of the tree.
You're seeing the divergent models there. Jim Farley, CEO of Ford, he pivoted to, I call it partial autonomy with the Blue Cruise system. The interesting thing on that, the technology aside on that, and this is all in Ford's public filings, Mr. Farley and Ford are trying to build a services business. They want to generate revenue from the services. Just please don't pull a BMW and charge for heated seats. You're going to have very upset customers on that. I can understand charging for the ADAS systems. And I want to point out that John Krafcik was right. When he publicly stated that Waymo would consider, I don't remember the exact language Mr. Krafcik used, around licensing the Waymo driver, he was correct, and he still is correct today. It was recently announced that Mr. Krafcik's now on the board of Rivian.
Mm-hmm.
Do we perhaps see the Waymo driver licensed to Rivian and used for an L2 system for highway driving? Because I think when you read between the lines on TCI fund management, you read the certain comments made by CFO Ruth Port of Alphabet, they both have a common denominator: cut cost and increase revenue from Waymo. The fastest way to do that is licensing. Does licensing come back at Waymo at some point?
I mean, you raise an interesting possibility. And yeah, John joining the Rivian board, is it a possibility? Sure. I mean, I'm sure it is. John Krafcik knows every auto executive on the planet. He's a known quantity and he's got long ties to a lot of folks. I think with RJ at Rivian doesn't have an autonomous system right now. They don't have an announced partner yet. Could it be Waymo? Sure. Because Rivian's also not, Ford had a stake in them and Amazon has a stake in them, but I don't think Zoox is licensing their system, and Ford has cut its stake dramatically in Rivian. So Rivian's kind of a free agent. And so, yeah, I think you raise an interesting possibility. And could that happen? Certainly. Will it happen? I have no idea. I don't know, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, John and RJ are both MIT grads, and so maybe they bond over that. I don't know.
It would be very. We don't know. We're not. I'm not going to make a prediction. I'll just say if it does indeed happen, it's a very interesting move.
Yeah.
And if it then all suddenly the bar for everybody set the tables high. Then you're going to have a licensing game where Cruise is going to be forced to license. GM probably won't let him do it, but you might get a shareholder activist in there that would try and force it. And then it brings me to Zoox. What is the Zoox end game? When I look at this, Waymo and Cruise are scaling. It's been publicly documented. Emotional's coming in strong with their Vegas operations. They have the Super Bowl coming up, and they have a clear roadmap of where they want to go. And then Zoox is just kind of sitting out there. And you have Andy Jassy, who's on a cost-cutting mission, the CEO of Amazon. Zoox's burn rate's high. They're not generating any revenue. It just seems that they were so high once, and now they've kind of just fallen off the radar.
Well, they've developed their vehicle. They spent a lot of time and effort perfecting their vehicle, which is perfectly fine. This kind of utility vanish thing. The space is, it is very much in that same vein as like the Cruise Origin. And I think the Zeekr van that Waymo showed off last fall from, Zeekr, the Chinese EV startup, are in that same kind of like shape and that utility vehicle. The van took a lot of resources to complete. They're the Zoox vehicle. They are not yet doing a lot of public stuff. They have no participation yet by public riders. They are on city streets in Silicon Valley, but they're only hauling like Zoox staff. As mentioned, I spoke with Aisha not so long ago, Aisha Evans, and they are fully committed to robotaxi. Even though if you look at that vehicle, certainly you could reconfigure it into a delightful little autonomous delivery vehicle. And the great mystery of that is Amazon buys an autonomous vehicle company, but only wants to use the tech for robotaxi. And meanwhile, it's this, 800-pound gorilla of logistics and consumer goods. And you think, well, wait a second, you're not gonna leverage this to create your own in-house autonomous delivery service. And thus far, that remains the case. I'm not privy to the conversations behind the scenes, so I don't know what Amazon management says to Zoox, but Aisha continues to say, nope, the focus remains robotaxi and robotaxi. Now, I hear from others that maybe the delivery piece is being considered at some point, but there's been no public confirmation of that, no timing. So it's really hard to say. So to your point, what's happening with Zoox? They're trying to master robotaxi, except they would seem to be behind the two big players in the Bay Area, Waymo and Cruise, because they've not launched anything meaningful. They're doing very limited public road testing today. It does not involve people like actual riders, non-company riders. So I don't know that how much longer that's sustainable. If Amazon has just decided, come hell or high water, we're going to do this and back this, maybe they have thought about that. Amazon lost a lot of money as a company for years. It was profoundly unprofitable for a very long time until it wasn't. So same can be said for Tesla, which used to be a massive pile of red ink until it turned into a pretty profitable company. So maybe they're just taking a longer view, but how long that view is, I don't know. It's going to be a while.
Something's going to give at some point. Amazon cut in the Alexa division. Everybody knows Alexa's associated with Amazon, and they had job layoffs in the thousands. In the Alexa division, at some point, layoffs are going to come, in my opinion, to the Zoox, especially in an economic downturn. The only thing that I can rationally put my head around is Amazon look to launch an Amazon Prime mobility tier in certain cities to generate revenue that way. That's the only thing I can see, because I just can't figure out how robotaxis live inside of Amazon. Every time I read every filing, every public statement by Mr. Andy Jassy, everything, and I cannot see how it all comes together.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I I have no insight as to what the thinking is. I go back to this point I raised earlier at the start of the conversation, which is, what is the model for profitability? At what point can this become profitable? I know of one company that we've discussed that can say, yeah, we know within a couple of years when we're going to be profitable. I've heard nothing about profitability from any other, whether it's Zoox or Waymo or Cruise or Emotional or anyone else. I don't know their timetable. I know one company that has a timetable for profitability.
And that's why that they're going to do what they're going to do. And Gaham's going to continue to run a business. And when they're profitable, you'll know because they'll file the S1 to go public on either New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. Mm-hmm. Alan, in your opinion, what is the future of autonomy?
Well, I think, we spent a lot of time on Gatik about filling this niche that you can expand, grow from that, get your foot in the door, and then build out. So I think we are going to have autonomous trucking. We're going to have autonomous delivery services. It just may come from a company that most of us did not expect or weren't paying attention to. I think we are going to see a lot of applications for military uses for sure. Would we rather have human truck drivers in a battlefield or, hauling fuel and supplies with human truck drivers? Or would we feel better like if robots are doing that? I think I know the answer to that. I think we would rather have fewer people exposed to that kind of danger. So there's some no-brainer ones like that. And I think ag is going to continue to be a really interesting application, whether it's John Deere with, autonomous harvesters or something smaller scale like Monarch Tractor, which can, help a grower that can't find farm labor do a little bit more with an autonomous electric tractor, whether that's just prepping a field or doing, things that aren't quite that hard, but you can do that today. Today in California, you can buy an electric Monarch tractor with an autonomous system that operates in your fields. That's a commercial product. That's not a someday, wouldn't it be nice? That's a now thing. So we are going to see autonomy and it's here, but it's not coming exactly the way we expected 5 years ago when we were all kind of excited about, this is gonna be wild. Someday, robotaxis, sure, and not just in a couple cities, but it's going to be a long haul there. So I think we're going to see it grow at the margins with these, niche applications, whether it's middle mile delivery of groceries and consumer goods or farming or military applications. All of those are going to be real. And maybe I'll get my autonomous transit buses at some time too.
You will. Robotics Research, now known as RRAI, they did it in Hartford. I forget the transit agency there. And I know that there is developments around it. And you might get your transit buses in public, but I think at some point you probably get them at Disney World first. It's a highly controlled environment. And when you get on the bus, you can give Mickey a high 4.
Yeah. I think Disneyland is kind of an ideal application of something like that.
Alan, this has been an insightful, wonderful conversation as always. You live up to the hype every time, sir. As we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
Well, I think it has been a little frustrating to see things not unfold as we anticipated some years ago. And disappointing, frankly. But at the same time, we are discovering that there's always someone, and oftentimes the person or company we weren't paying attention to, that actually is figuring it out just in a way that we didn't expect. And I would say, we've talked up Gatik a lot, but it is really hard to point today to another company that looks like they're actually on a path to create a viable business built around autonomy. And by the way, there's revenue and a path to profitability.
Yeah, I'll summarize it this way. There's riches in niches. You're seeing that with Gatik. You're seeing that what Deere's doing. You're going to see that with Monarch is doing. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is profitable IPOs. Alan, thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today.
Thanks, Grayson. That was fun.
If you've enjoyed listening, please kindly rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Road to Autonomy, or email podcast@roadtoautonomy.com. The Road to Autonomy podcast is produced by the Road to Autonomy LLC. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect those views of the Road to Autonomy, its subsidiaries, its shareholders, directors, investors, or partners. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only. and should not be taken as legal, investment, tax, or business advice. Nothing is a recommendation that you purchase, sell, or hold any security or other investment, or that you pursue any investment style or strategy. The content of this podcast is presented on an as-is basis with no warranties, express or implied, of any kind. Financial mentions about companies in the Road to Autonomy Index and discussions about the Road to Autonomy Indexes are for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon when making any investment decision. Furthermore, an inclusion of security within the Road to Autonomy Index is not a recommendation by the Road to Autonomy Indices, LLC, to buy, sell, or hold that such security, nor is it considered to be investment advice.